The black-haired girl touches her bruised face, reflecting on her painful and recurring fate.
A resolve takes hold as she decides to stop relying on those who hurt her.
Locked in a dungeon, the black-haired girl uses blood to draw a mysterious magic circle. She recalls the blonde man and his family, realizing they were her ultimate downfall.
The noblewoman hides behind her fan, symbolizing the secrets and manipulation of high society.
The black-haired girl envisions herself as a discarded puppet, powerless against her cruel destiny. She recounts how she was completely ignorant during the events of her first life. In her second life, she desperately tried to gain attention and become well-known.
She details how she tried to copy another's behavior in her subsequent 2 lives.
Despite her severe injuries, the black-haired girl continues drawing the sigil on the floor.
She hunches over the blood circle within the shadows of the prison bars, nearing completion.
She notes that she tried hard to be loved, but it was all useless. Thorns and a dark rose emphasize the bitterness and isolation of her past experiences.
Blinding white light erupts from the blood-drawn circle, signaling the start of her regression.
She declares that she will no longer yearn for anything from anyone ever again.
The magical hourglass turns, marking her journey back to a pivotal moment in time.
The black-haired girl wakes up suddenly, gasping as she returns to her younger body. The black-haired girl observes that there is not a single wound remaining on her hands. The black-haired girl lets out a soft sound while sitting up and looking around. She looks at her younger self, realizing she returned to before everything went wrong.
Stepping onto the floor, she tests her strength while adjusting to her familiar surroundings.
The black-haired girl expresses confusion as a sudden wave of dizziness causes her to stumble. She acknowledges that her body has become feeble as payment for turning back time. She understands that her physical state is ruined because she used non-human magical powers. The maid asks if something is wrong and states she is entering, to which the girl agrees. She remains deep in thought, her expression cold and detached despite the maid's presence. The maid rushes to her mistress's side and asks the girl what has happened to her. The girl tells her she fell. Well, that's one way to explain a sudden case of chronic time-traveling collapse.
The maid looks on with a silent, observant gaze, perhaps sensing something is amiss.
She notes that it is currently the day before she officially enters the palace. She describes her previous role as a lover to a man called the Mad Emperor.
She questions who would ever expect her to be happy about such a role.
The maid offers to help the girl up as she continues to stagger and wobble. The maid informs her that she needs to wash her face and offers to get a basin. The maid tells her mistress to use the cloth to block her nose in the meantime. The black-haired girl gazes at the window, seeking a moment of peace and clarity. She reaches out to draw back the curtains and let in the morning light. The black-haired girl complains about the bright light hitting her eyes as she squints. She pushes the window open, looking out at the gardens and the fresh air. The black-haired girl looks out the window and sighs with relief that she feels better. Her face hardens with determination as she prepares to change the course of her fate.
She recalls a memory of someone claiming her hair looks like it is ashen.
The red-haired noblewoman lifts the girl's chin and notes that her face is at least attractive. The red-haired noblewoman looks down at the girl and declares that she will take her. A statement confirms the end of the war fought for the sake of continental integration. A white flag waves over a silent, corpse-strewn battlefield, marking a somber peace. In the shadow of a stained glass window, a violent betrayal results in a fatal stabbing. In the shadow, history records that religious persecution became a common occurrence in the period that followed. She remembers the tragedy of being abandoned by her biological parents during her youth. As a young child, she sits alone amidst ruins, the sole survivor of her circumstances. She reveals that she lived in a temple before being sent to an orphanage. Her life changed drastically when she was adopted into the prestigious Duchess Loon's household. The young black-haired girl looks up at her new lavish surroundings in complete awe. She describes her past excitement as feeling like a princess within a classic fairy tale. In the present, the brown-haired maid announces that the girl's wash basin is ready. The maid explains that the Duchess wants to speak and urges her mistress to prepare. The black-haired girl watches silently as the maid begins to tend to the window. The maid objects to the window being open, citing the Duchess's preference for fragrances. Items on the vanity recall how the Duchess insisted on candles to mask her set. The black-haired girl orders the windows to stay open, rejecting her past self's justifications. The maid complies with the request while the girl looks out at the estate. The maid begins brushing the girl's long hair as she prepares for the day's duties. While her hair is brushed, she resolves to never be a discarded puppet again. The Loon family crest serves as a reminder of the power dynamic she must navigate. Being dressed, she realizes she lacks the personal funds required to simply run away. She notes that her jewelry is only provided for events and is strictly monitored. The brown-haired maid fastens a necklace, maintaining total control over the girl's appearance. She clenches her dress, contemplating how to save money and find an eventual escape. She recalls that the Emperor's true lover is destined to return in 1 year. Following the maid out of the room, she prepares to face the house's matriarch. Her face hardens as she decides to finish her secret preparations before the lover returns. While walking through the corridor, the black-haired girl suddenly clenches her dress in pain. A wave of dizziness strikes her, making the surroundings blur as she struggles to walk.
Gasping for breath, she clutches her chest while her vision begins to fade into darkness. The girl collapses to the floor as the maid continues walking, initially ignoring the fall. Gripping her chest, the black-haired girl notes that this specific pain is entirely new.
The maid looks down suspiciously, wondering if her mistress is feigning illness to avoid going.
The maid offers assistance, but the girl refuses, stating she cannot continue right now. She instructs the maid to tell her mother she will see her at a later time. Turning to leave, the brown-haired maid privately complains that the girl is a constant bother. The girl remains collapsed on the floor as the maid's footsteps echo down the hall. A man in noble attire walks through the sunlit corridor toward the fallen girl.
The man stops and looks toward the girl with a look of mild curiosity.
He stands over the black-haired girl, observing her current state with a cold, detached gaze.
Remigio asks what she's doing there, and she realizes exactly who has found her. The black-haired girl weakly claims she was merely taking a moment to relax.
Remigio questions the logic of relaxing on the floor at the end of a corridor.
He secretly believes that those born into low status never truly change despite their education.
Remigio commands her to return to her room to prepare for tomorrow's palace entry.
He begins to walk away, his movements fluid and dismissive of her obvious physical distress.
Remigio gives a final, cold instruction for the black-haired girl to look after herself.
As he departs, she realizes his seemingly harsh words were actually born of genuine concern. The man stops for a moment, his back turned as the girl watches him go. She wonders if he would have liked her more if he had been born female. Remigio turns around and dismisses her bizarre question as nothing more than utter nonsense. The man's face darkens, reflecting the cold and arrogant reputation he holds in society.
A vision depicts a female Lune heir as the emperor's ideal partner for ultimate power.
She recalls that the Duchess only had sons, Remigio and Gerlia, ruining her original plan. The Duchess adopted her as a final resort to use as a tool for the family. She reflects on how she became a mere puppet for the interests of House Lune.
Remigio stands amidst falling gold coins, poised to lead his family into its longest golden age.
Shriel gazes coldly, knowing her entry into the palace only serves the interests of her brother.
Remigio sternly commands the black-haired girl to avoid creating any problems during her stay at the palace.
Remigio orders the girl to finish her preparations for their departure to the palace the next day.
As Remigio walks away, Shriel notes that he is unable to hide a single true emotion. Shriel reflects on the situation, finally detaching herself from her desires to see things more clearly.
Standing alone in the grand hallway, Shriel realizes the reality of her position within the house.
The scene shifts to Shriel's lavish bedroom as she rests peacefully before the morning's events begin. Shriel lies awake in her bed, her yellow eyes reflecting deep thought about her impending future. Shriel sits up in her large bed and gives permission for the people outside to enter. 3 faceless maids enter the room carrying a jewelry box and a new dress for Shriel.
A lavish white dress and a box filled with precious gems are presented for the girl's selection.
The maids begin preparing Shriel, brushing her hair and applying makeup while she remains passive and detached.
Shriel looks out the large window, observing the grounds while the maids continue their morning work. The maids react with shock as Duchess Lune suddenly bursts into the room to find Shriel. Duchess Lune enters the room, noting she heard that Shriel had collapsed onto the floor earlier.
Shriel appears transformed, dressed in a white gown with red accents amidst a sea of flowers.
Duchess Lune stares intently at Shriel, her expression unreadable as she assesses the girl's new appearance.
Duchess Lune and Shriel stand facing each other, a heavy silence hanging within the ornate bedroom. Shriel asks Duchess Lune if it is truly a requirement for her to go to the palace. Duchess Lune questions Shriel's sudden hesitation, asking the girl if she is currently feeling afraid.
Shriel denies being afraid, causing Duchess Lune to sigh while rubbing her forehead in visible frustration.
Duchess Lune acknowledges that Shriel has much on her mind regarding the scandalous rumors about His Majesty. Duchess Lune places a hand on Shriel's shoulder, urging her to consider the family's ultimate goal. Duchess Lune smiles slyly, suggesting that winning the Emperor's heart and providing an heir is paramount. Duchess Lune continues her manipulation, emphasizing that such an achievement would be the best outcome for everyone. Shriel glances at the Duchess's hand, bluntly summarizing that she is being asked to sacrifice herself. Duchess Lune expresses her distaste for emulating Charlotte Heinen, noting they have no other viable choice.
Shriel questions Duchess Lune about her attendance at Charlotte's funeral, seeking confirmation of the girl's death.
Duchess Lune confirms her attendance, her back turned to Shriel as she stares toward the rim.
Shriel presses further, asking the Duchess if the person in the casket was truly Charlotte Heinen. A memory shows the deceased Charlotte, noted to look like the Heinen daughter despite her injuries. Duchess Lune abruptly ends the conversation, turning away and refusing to discuss the morbid topic any further. Duchess Lune firmly grips Shriel's wrist, her touch exerting a sense of control and cold authority. Looking into the mirror, Duchess Lune promises Shriel a different fate if she follows her teachings. Duchess Lune tells Shriel not to be nervous, reminding her that she is now a Lune. Duchess Lune signals the maids to bring forward the final accessories for Shriel's important palace debut. A vibrant red earring glows with a magical light as it is fastened to the girl's ear. Duchess Lune watches closely as the jewelry is applied, her face cast in a dark shadow. Duchess Lune gives a final instruction for Shriel to smile exactly as Charlotte Heinen once did. Shriel resolves to no longer live according to the Duchess's wishes as she stares into the mirror.
Remigio, Duchess Lune, and Jeremiah stand together, watching as Shriel prepares for her departure.
Shriel heads toward the imperial carriage, having given her final greetings to the family using her.
Shriel pauses, recalling her past belief that bearing an heir would satisfy her family's selfish wishes. Shriel looks back one last time, her expression filled with a quiet sense of resentment and resolve. Shriel bows her head slightly, offering a final, hollow thanks for everything the Lune family provided. Remigio and Jeremiah watch Shriel depart, their eyes filled with complex and perhaps conflicting emotions. Duchess Lune watches the carriage leave in silence, her expression stern as she considers her plans.
A vision of the deceased Charlotte looms over Shriel, a reminder of the role she must play.
Surrounded by dark roses, Shriel prepares to face her new life at the palace with determination. An imperial carriage rattles through a torrential downpour toward the gates of the palace. Inside the carriage, the emperor clutches his head in pain as a voice calls to him.
Maids open the ornate doors, announcing that Lady Charlotte of the Heinen family has finally arrived.
Shriel walks across the dark room toward the emperor, who remains seated on a sofa.
Blood splatters the floorboards as the hem of Shriel's white dress sweeps past the mess.
Shriel gazes at the scene, noting that someone has died in the emperor's presence once again. Standing over a corpse, the emperor asks Shriel if she is Shasha while the storm rages. With blood staining his face, the emperor reaches out for her and desperately calls her name.
Lightning flashes through the large window, illuminating the rain-streaked glass as thunder rumbles outside.
The emperor's bloody hand touches Shriel's cheek as he stares at her in a daze. Shriel is suddenly thrown to the floor, gasping as she reacts to the man's sudden movement. The emperor pants heavily, his expression hidden in shadow as he looms over the fallen girl. Overcome by his fragile state, the man slumps down and covers his face with bloody hands. The man asks if she is Shasha, while Shriel watches him calmly amidst a floral vision. Falling to his knees, the emperor begs Shasha not to leave his side ever again.
Shriel embraces the broken man, noting he has lost his sanity and only needs his Charlotte.
The man continues to mumble and ask her not to leave while holding her tightly. A close-up reveals the blood on Shriel's cheek and the glowing red jewelry she wears.
A voice from behind the door reports that His Majesty has finally fallen into a slumber.
Shriel commands the maids to escort her to a room while blood remains on her face.
A lavish meal is served for Shriel as she attempts to settle into her room.
Shriel sits before the food as a maid notes the physician will arrive after she eats. Attempting to eat, Shriel suddenly chokes and coughs violently while the maids rush to her side. Staring at the blood in her palm, Shriel realizes her body cannot properly intake food anymore. Shriel contemplates her deteriorating state, wondering what will happen if her condition worsens this time. Rain patters against the glass as the maid urges Shriel to rest before the physician arrives.
Shriel observes her jewelry, noting that such expensive stones are easily traced if she sells them. The girl holds a glowing green pendant, considering the risks involved in selling the family assets.
She concludes that she must sell the items on the black market to avoid being traced. The physician arrives at the door, accompanied by a maid to evaluate Shriel's worsening physical condition. The physician begins her examination with a stethoscope and expresses her regret before giving her assessment.
Sitting upright in bed, Shriel listens as the physician prepares to deliver her final diagnosis.
The physician points to a blood-stained cloth, noting the gravity of Shriel coughing up blood earlier.
The doctor delivers a grim prognosis, stating that Shriel may only have 1 or 2 years left.
Shriel asks if there is any possible way to recover her health as quickly as she can. The physician admits she has never seen anyone in this specific state, making a recovery unlikely.
Pushing up her glasses, the doctor promises to prescribe medicine, though it will not be foolproof.
The physician emphasizes that Shriel must survive, as she is currently the emperor's one and only partner.
Shriel realizes the emperor will surely lose control and go berserk if he discovers her terminal illness.
The older physician nods in acknowledgement of Shriel's silent instruction to keep the diagnosis a secret.
Shriel returns to her meal but begins coughing again as a maid cries in alarm.
Shriel quickly consumes a flask of blue medicine to manage her symptoms and maintain her false identity.
Shriel reflects on the hollow nature of her role, pretending to be Charlotte in the emperor's arms.
She notes that despite their physical proximity, the two have never actually engaged in sexual intimacy. The emperor looks back as a voice addresses him, asking what the urgent matter is about. A servant bows and announces that Duchess Heinen has arrived at the palace to see Charlotte. Touching Shriel's hair, the emperor informs her that her mother has come to visit her. A formal portrait of Duchess Heinen and Charlotte serves as a reminder of the role Shriel plays. Shriel sits in a distant gazebo while Duchess Heinen clasps her hands together pensively. Shriel walks through the palace gardens with a guard, her expression unreadable following the announcement. Duchess Hainan gasps as Shriel approaches her, addressing her with a false and mocking filial greeting. Furious, Duchess Hainan slams her hand down and rebukes the girl's audacity for her current appearance. A thought reminds her that many spectators are currently watching their public interaction in the gardens. Looking entirely unbothered, Shriel addresses the woman before her formally as Duchess Hainan. The surrounding guards and maids observe the tense confrontation unfolding within the palace's lush garden. Shriel coldly remarks that while she is a shell, the Duchess wouldn't want her daughter's face scarred. Duchess Hainan grits her teeth in suppressed rage while listening to Shriel's thinly veiled threat. Shriel moves to lower the Duchess's hand as the woman continues to seethe in silence. The palace staff watches the unusual dynamic between the mother and daughter with growing unease. Duchess Hainan realizes with horror that Duchess Lune has truly descended into a state of madness. She recalls that Duchess Lune was driven by a ruthless desire to become the family head. The memory details how Duchess Lune slaughtered her siblings and obsessed over producing a female heir. After becoming sterile, the Duchess's cruelty culminated in the murder of her own husband. Haunted by these dark truths, a single tear escapes as Duchess Hainan looks at the imposter. She realizes the depth of the betrayal, seeing her late daughter being used as a pawn. Losing her composure, Duchess Hainan roughly grabs Shriel's shoulder to demand a truthful response. The Duchess shouts at the girl, ordering her to answer for her deception. She demands to know the reason for Shriel's commitment to pretending to be her daughter. The weight of her grief and anger is visible as the Duchess searches Shriel's eyes. Shaking the girl, the Duchess asks if she has successfully secured His Majesty's heart. She presses further, hysterically asking if Shriel is currently pregnant with the Emperor's child. Met with silence, the Duchess mockingly asks if the girl has lost her ability to speak. Shriel maintains her mask of indifference, staring back at the distraught woman with cold green eyes. Feeling the futility of her outburst, Duchess Hainan looks away as the garden breeze blows. The Duchess turns her head sharply, attempting to regain some semblance of her dignity. Her hand drops to her side as she yields to the cold reality of the situation. With a stern voice, Duchess Hainan commands Shriel to stop the facade of being her daughter. Shriel remains, stating that she is unable to comply with the Duchess's request. Shocked by the girl's blatant refusal, Duchess Hainan turns back to face her in disbelief. A narrative note suggests that Hainan lost her chance to utilize the opportunity she was given. Shriel's gaze remains steady as she prepares to lecture the woman on their historical roles. Legend tells of an age of darkness where devils swarmed the world, causing immense human suffering. A benevolent dragon descended into the world after observing the despair of the human race. The dragon selected 5 exceptionally talented individuals to assist in its holy crusade. Together, they drove out the devils and built a nation, establishing a new era of peace. The dragon promised that the descendants of these 5 would take turns serving as its partner. The historical rotation began with the Hainan household, who were the first to serve the throne. The Lune household was meant to follow, but the previous emperor broke the tradition. He chose a commoner as his partner, bypassing the established rotation of the noble houses. Raymond, the current emperor, was born from this union, complicating the divine bloodline. Born with blue eyes instead of gold, Raymond lacked the imperial symbol as Hainan failed their duty. The rotation shifted, placing the burden of providing a partner onto the Lune household once more. However, the Lune family initially failed the empire by failing to produce a suitable daughter. Deprived of their chance before, the opportunity has now returned to the doorstep of the Hainan family. Shriel and Duchess Hainan stand in a stalemate, the history of their families weighing between them.
Shriel asks if it isn't only fair for the Lune household to reclaim the opportunity now.
Duchess Hainan remains silent, unable to find a retort against Shriel's cold, logical assessment. Shriel instructs the Duchess to direct any further grievances to her mother, Duchess Lune. A vision of Charlotte's genuine smile serves as a tragic contrast to Shriel's cold imitation. Duchess Hainan issues a final whispered warning for Shriel not to dare continue this path. Duchess Hainan mocks Shriel for calling Duchess Lune her mother while wearing Charlotte's face. Shriel looks down coldly as the Duchess huddles on the ground in a daze. A close-up shows Shriel's red earring as she prepares to dismiss the weeping woman. Duchess Hainan covers her face and cries, clearly upset after meeting her daughter's replacement. Shriel declares their conversation over while the Duchess continues to sob on the garden floor. Shriel commands her maids to take the Duchess away since the meeting has concluded. Narration reveals it has been over a month since the public learned of Charlotte's death. Shriel walks away through the rose garden, her heels clicking rhythmically against the stone. A vision of Shriel lying among lilies illustrates the public's belief she is discreetly recuperating. Shriel looks back with a sharp, green-eyed gaze as she continues her walk. The narrative emphasizes the cold reality that the original Charlotte is truly dead. Shriel strolls through the palace gardens accompanied by a purple-haired guard in formal attire. Shriel suddenly clutches her forehead as a dizzy spell overcomes her in the garden. The girl begins to wobble and fall, prompting the guard to shout out in alarm. The guard catches Shriel as she collapses, frantically calling out to her unconscious form. Shuriel lies motionless in her large, ornate bed after her sudden collapse in the garden.
Waking up, Shuriel blinks in the darkness and wonders if she has fainted once again.
A voice calling out to Shasha startles Shuriel as footsteps approach her bedside.
Shuriel sits up and sees the Emperor standing near her bed in the moonlight.
The Emperor asks if she is okay, his expression filled with deep worry and distress.
With tears in his eyes, the Emperor stares at Shuriel and calls her by name.
The Emperor sits in a chair by the bed, his figure casting a long shadow.
He grabs Shuriel's hands tightly and calls her name again, desperate for her presence.
Shuriel winces and asks if her health is really in such a bad state.
She recalls the Duchess straining her wrist earlier and wonders if that caused the pain.
A wide view shows the Emperor sitting silently by Shuriel's bed in the dark room.
The Emperor speaks again, his voice filled with the weight of his lingering trauma. Crying, the Emperor confesses his intense fear that he was going to lose her tonight.
Shuriel observes the man, noting how much he is suffering while believing her false identity.
A shattered mirror reflects Charlotte's image, highlighting that he doesn't know she is an imposter.
A visual contrast shows Shuriel's true self and the Emperor separated by their conflicting realities.
Shuriel glances at the Emperor as he continues to address her as his beloved Shasha. The Emperor encourages her to tell him if there is anything she needs or wants. He is depicted blindfolded, pleading to a hollow shell that represents his false perception of her. Shuriel internally doubts if he could actually provide everything she truly desires to have. The Emperor promises to give her anything if she agrees to stay fully by his side. A thought bubble emphasizes his commitment to granting her whatever she requests of him. Shuriel considers the extent of his offer, wondering about the limits of his generosity.
She thinks about asking for his heart, questioning if he would truly surrender it. Memories of Charlotte flash by as the text notes that such intimacy hasn't happened once.
Shuriel bluntly requests gems, testing his offer to provide whatever she asks for. The Emperor stares at her with a stunned expression, shocked by her material request. Shuriel adds that money would also be good, further pushing for wealth and assets. She acknowledges her need for wealth is fueled by her desire to eventually run away.
The Emperor asks if that is truly the only thing she wants from him.
Shuriel gives a simple nod, confirming that riches are her primary and only concern.
The Emperor stands up quickly, his movements sharp as he reacts to her request.
He leans over the bed, beginning to promise her even more than she asked for. The Emperor vows to give her an entire mine if that is what she desires. Servants enter the room with several gift boxes, announcing that His Majesty has sent presents.
Shuriel overlooks the boxes of wealth provided to her since her fainting spell.
The Emperor continuously sends precious gemstones to Shuriel to secure her favor. Shuriel contemplates her situation while examining one of the many rubies she received.
Palace rumors swirl as the wind carries the staff's idle chatter through open windows.
Maids inform Shuriel that her collapse was attributed to receiving the dragon's heart.
While being groomed, Shuriel reflects on the slow process of gaining the maid's trust.
The brilliant sparkle of a red gemstone catches the light of Shuriel Holton.
Shuriel stands before her treasures, noticing a maid's curious and lingering gaze on them. The maid cannot help but glance repeatedly at the high-value red gemstone Shuriel holds. A faint, calculating grin appears on Shuriel's face as she notices the maid's interest. Shuriel directly asks the maid if she desires the gemstone for herself.
The maid quickly declines, prompting Shuriel to clarify that it isn't a gift.
Shuriel proposes an exchange for common items, confusing the maid with her unusual request.
She specifically points to the humble copper and silver coins in the maid's pocket. The maid is startled, pointing out the massive difference in value between the two. Shuriel maintains her grin, undisturbed by the illogical nature of the proposed trade. She provides a simple excuse, claiming she only wishes to collect the common coins.
The maid chalks the odd request up to noble eccentricity and agrees to the trade.
Shuriel explains that while she has gold, she lacks the untraceable small change she needs. She emphasizes that the transaction is fair as long as both parties receive what they want.
The maid reaches for her coins, ready to complete the exchange for the precious gem.
Eager for such an easy fortune, the maid happily agrees to the lopsided exchange. Hands drop copper and silver coins into a box, marking Shuriel's first secret funds.
As dusk falls over the palace, the staff begins to adjust to their new reality. Noble girls working as maids quickly normalize these strange transactions to satisfy their financial needs. Shuriel successfully turns the maids into accomplices, filling her chest with untraceable currency. Closing her box, Shuriel notes that common coins are far safer than easily traced gold. Shuriel walks through the rose garden, accompanied by her loyal purple-haired guard.
A sudden dizzy spell forces Shuriel to pause and acknowledge her lingering physical frailty.
The quiet garden fountain stands as a peaceful backdrop to Shuriel's afternoon rest. Shuriel notes that the Emperor's bouts of madness have recently become less frequent. She intends to use this peaceful window to build her strength through regular walks.
Reaching toward the fountain, Shuriel watches a single flower drift across the water's surface.
She stops her hand just above the water as she contemplates her next move.
Shuriel sits by the fountain while the guard stands watch, maintaining a respectful distance.
She addresses the guard, who immediately responds with formal and dedicated readiness.
Shuriel's gaze falls upon the guard's sword, sparking a sudden and specific interest. She asks if she can borrow the weapon for a moment to test herself.
Shuriel reaches out, her expression determined as she prepares to handle the heavy blade.
Dark clouds gather over the palace as pained groans echo from the royal quarters.
Inside the palace, Raymond collapses to his knees as a terrifying transformation begins. Raymond pants in agony as his skin turns into scales and his hands become claws. Large wings sprout from his back as he screams, fully consumed by his draconic power.
In the garden, the guard warned Shuriel that the weather is turning dangerous. Shuriel struggles to lift the guard's heavy sword, finding it far too burdensome to wield. She recalls mimicking Charlotte's expert swordsmanship in her past, possessing the knowledge but not the body.
Trembling from the weight, Shuriel realizes her feeble state makes a martial escape impossible.
A panicked shout for the Emperor to restrain himself startles Shuriel, drawing her attention.
The distant towers of the palace overlook a scene of growing chaos and alarm.
Maids dash toward Shuriel, frantically warning her that the Emperor has begun behaving recklessly. The dragon-like Emperor Raymond descends from the sky, causing the guard to shout in alarm. The guard commands everyone to kneel as the Emperor lands forcefully, leaving the maids trembling. A warning is issued that no one but her ladyship is permitted to look at Raymond. Shuriel looks back in shock, noting that the Emperor has never behaved so erratically before.
Shuriel observes the Emperor's feral state, realizing he currently will not listen to anyone but her.
Shuriel freezes in fear as the Emperor's clawed hand suddenly reaches out toward her face. Raymond's massive claw strikes Shuriel's borrowed sword with violent force, shattering her defensive posture. Shuriel screams in agony as the sword cracks and blood splatters across the garden floor.
Shuriel collapses onto the cold stone path, her body battered and the broken sword lying uselessly.
The monstrous Emperor looms over Shuriel as she lies prone and incapacitated on the ground.
Shuriel glances up in despair, realizing with horror that Raymond truly intended to kill her.
A secondary strike sends blood flying across the garden as Shuriel is tossed aside like a doll. Shuriel chokes and coughs up blood, her vision blurring from the sheer trauma of the assault. The maids watch in paralyzed horror as Shuriel lies broken and bleeding near the garden pavilion. Struggling to breathe, Shuriel desperately tells herself that she cannot afford to die here now. As she coughs up more blood, Shuriel's resolve hardens against the encroaching shadow of death. Fumbling against the ground, Shuriel desperately wishes she could turn back time once again. A close-up of the Emperor's slit pupil eye reflects the cold, draconic instinct driving his rampage. Raymond calls out to Shasha as Shuriel reaches out into the void with her bloody hand. Raymond calls her name again while Shuriel thinks that she is gradually losing her consciousness. A distorted memory of a man appears as Shuriel's world fades into a hazy, gray blur. The scene shifts to a desolate ruin where the wind whistles through empty stone arches. A young girl with dark hair weeps bitterly amidst the remains of the ancient structure.
A silver-haired man in formal military attire kneels before the girl to offer his comfort.
Wiping her tears, the silver-haired man tells the girl she will temporarily forget about him. The man tells the girl that she can realize her dreams if she truly wants to. Standing within a glowing magical seal, the man asks the girl to call his name one day. Shuriel jolts awake in her bed, her face soaked with tears from the vivid nightmare.
Sitting up and wiping her eyes, Shuriel wonders why she is crying over a distant dream.
She recalls drawing a bloody pattern, questioning the reality of her survival and current state. Shuriel springs from her bed, frantic to check her reflection and confirm her physical condition.
Reaching for a large standing mirror, Shuriel gasps as she prepares to confront her own image.
Shuriel touches her face and notes that her current appearance differs from when she was reborn.
Raymond enters the room and asks Shasha if she is finally up as he approaches her.
A single, haunting question hangs in the air as Shuriel stares suspiciously at the Emperor.
Shuriel grabs Raymond and asks if he really gave her that heart as he stands there.
Narration reveals that the Emperor possesses 2 hearts because of his heritage as a powerful dragon.
One heart functions as a normal organ, sustaining the Emperor's physical body like any other creature.
The other is a symbolic heart called the Elixia, which can empower even the weakest humans. Raymond calls her Shasha as Shuriel shakes him and demands he take it back right now.
Shuriel tells the Emperor she does not need it and failed to give it when she wanted.
Shuriel slumps to her knees, weeping as she questions why he gave it to her now.
Raymond kneels beside the grieving woman, his hands reaching out to steady her trembling form.
Raymond looks down at the girl and begins to speak to her in a gentle voice.
Raymond pulls Shuriel into a desperate embrace, holding her tightly as she continued to sob. Shuriel realizes with a heavy heart that the Emperor still doesn't know she isn't Charlotte.
Socialites whisper about the daughter of the Loon family and the mystery surrounding the Elixia. An elder explains imperial procedures to Raymond and Charlotte during a formal audience in the past.
The narrative notes the public's displeasure when the Emperor suddenly granted the Elixia to Charlotte. A maid enters the room and informs Charlotte that she has a letter from Duchess Loon. The red-haired woman dismisses the maid while reflecting on another persistent letter received.
Narration reveals Duchess Lune has been sending frequent letters to her daughter recently. The letters express joy regarding the dragon's heart and urgent wedding preparation plans.
Shriel glances away, seemingly burdened by the contents of the Duchess's latest message.
She considers that the Duchess likely did not anticipate how she would respond.
Using magic learned to be a perfect daughter, Shriel incinerates the incoming correspondence. Gazing at the ashes, she realizes a wedding would make her situation irreversible.
She walks through her chambers, noting that the real Charlotte will return soon.
Standing amidst blooming roses, Shriel settles on a decisive plan for her immediate future.
During her next meeting, Shriel expresses a sudden desire to go for a walk. Raymond notes that she will be much busier once their formal wedding ceremony concludes.
The Emperor suggests going on a picnic together before the upcoming royal schedule intensifies.
Raymond gazes affectionately at Shriel, unaware of the hidden intentions behind her quiet demeanor.
A hand taps on a formal document, emphasizing the weight of their current engagement.
Raymond holds her face gently, expressing his complete willingness to fulfill her simple request. A royal carriage arrives at a lush green clearing to begin their afternoon outing.
Shriel steps out of the carriage, taking in the serene and secluded forest environment.
She addresses her purple-haired guard, who responds with immediate and formal nightly devotions.
Shriel reveals she has provided a separate basket for the guard to enjoy alone.
She grins, explaining she wanted to ensure her protector does not go hungry today.
Turning back to Raymond, Shriel informs him that they are ready to proceed further.
The guard bows deeply as the royal couple heads toward their chosen picnic spot.
They settle on a blanket where Raymond begins eating the lunch Shriel personally prepared. Raymond enjoys the sandwich, complimenting the quality of the food she brought for them. The Emperor suggests they should enjoy these quiet outdoor moments together more frequently hereafter.
Shriel smiles warmly at Raymond, preparing to introduce the next phase of her plan.
A picnic basket reveals several glittering jewels alongside the wine and dining supplies.
Shriel proposes a playful game involving the various treasures she has brought along today.
She explains that Raymond must successfully find all the jewels she intends to hide. Surrounded by flowers, Shriel asks if the Emperor is willing to join her game. Raymond nods with a gentle smile, agreeing to participate in her light-hearted forest challenge.
A close-up captures Shriel's calculating grin as her trap begins to take definitive shape.
She produces a long black cloth, preparing to limit the Emperor's formidable physical advantages.
Shriel wraps the blindfold around Raymond's head, obscuring his vision for the coming game.
Her hands tighten the knot, ensuring the Emperor remains immobile and sightless for now.
She explains the blindfold is necessary to counter his acute and supernatural draconic senses.
Shriel leans in close, the atmosphere between them shifting into a moment of intimacy. Hovering near his ear, she notes that his senses are far more sharp than hers. Raymond sits patiently as Shriel explains it will take time to hide the jewels.
She asks if he can wait for her signal, maintaining the ruse of the game.
Still blindfolded, Raymond nods obediently, trusting her completely as she prepares to leave him.
Shriel smiles one last time, her eyes glinting with the prospect of her freedom.
Clutching the basket, Shriel walks quickly away while Raymond remains waiting on the blanket.
A memory shows a maid questioning why Shriel insisted on preparing the basket herself.
Shriel had explained her desire to personally prepare the meal for their first picnic.
She dismissed the maid, ensuring no one saw what she was truly packing inside.
Secretly, Shriel confirms the presence of a heavy bag filled with untraceable escape currency. In the present, Shriel sprints through the dense trees, breathing heavily from the exertion. She realizes she is finally strong enough to run while carrying her heavy escape funds. To buy more time, she drops several jewels to lead the Emperor's trail away. Shriel believes she can successfully delay the Emperor's pursuit by using his current sightless state. Gasping for breath, Shriel flees while her royal guard remains unconscious from the hidden sleeping pills. A bold narration confirms that every aspect of her daring escape is proceeding exactly as planned.
Shriel glances back, relieved that the prescribed sleeping pills successfully neutralized her vigilant purple-haired guard's awareness.
With a determined stride, the red-haired woman rushes away from the carriage and deeper into the forest.
Shriel reaches out to a horse while silently apologizing for the necessary deception she must commit.
Using a sharp kitchen knife, she decisively slices through the thick leather harnesses to free the horse. The horse rears up and neighs loudly as Shriel tries to calm the startled and powerful beast.
Offering a sweet sugar cube, she gently gains the animal's trust before beginning the next escape phase.
Shriel mounts the freed horse and prepares to ride away from the remnants of the carriage. Riding past the carriage, Shriel notes with satisfaction that the drugged female guard has not yet awakened. Galloping through the woods, Shriel urges her steed to move faster to create distance from the Emperor. Shriel focuses on the path ahead while maintaining a tight grip on her basket during the ride. Driven by a certain destination, Shriel steers the horse toward a specific location outside the woods. Arriving at a high vantage point, she gazes down at her final destination near the capital. Shriel reflects on the irony of hiding right at the foot of the palace she just fled. Resolving to discard her former identity, she raises a knife to cut her long red hair.
She reaches for her distinctive red jewelry, preparing to cast away the last symbols of her nobility.
With a heavy stomp, she smashes her gemstone earring into the ground to erase her physical trail.
Now sporting short dark hair, the disguised woman prepares to vanish into the busy city crowds. Shariel covers her head with a hood, officially deciding to hide in plain sight as a commoner.
The scene shifts to a bustling urban street where citizens go about their daily routines and business. A closed shop door introduces a conversation regarding legends of buried treasures and fallen, occupied nations.
Working as a maid, Shariel wipes a cup while a cloaked man discusses treasures hidden underground.
The dark-haired maid remains indifferent as the traveler asks if she has any interest in his stories.
Shariel firmly rejects the mysterious man's proposition, causing him to react with mild curiosity and surprise.
Carl returns with groceries as the cloaked man suggests Shariel should help realize his personal wishes. Carl looks bewildered when the traveler suddenly suggests he participate in the conversation about his eager wishes. Teasingly, Carl asks if the cloaked customer is being jealous or making things difficult for the maid.
Carl turns away blushing as Shariel continues her work behind the counter, ignoring their playful banter. The hooded man explains that he is not searching for someone who is simply of use.
He challenges her perspective on her own ambitions while Shariel maintains her quiet and professional demeanor.
Shariel listens silently as the customer speaks about her potential to achieve whatever she truly desires. A close-up of the man's red draconic eye reveals his true nature as he questions her reaction. Shariel clutches the counter as her head throbs with pain whenever she locks eyes with this man.
Shariel turns away to fulfill his usual order, ending the unsettling and mysterious interaction for now.
Shariel asks Carl to engage in small talk with the customer while she organizes the kitchen area. Whispering to Shariel, Carl asks if the strange man made another weird and unusual proposition today.
With a faint grin, Shariel agrees and proceeds to prepare the food for their regular cloaked guest.
Carl pours a hot drink as the routine of the shop continues despite the odd customers.
The customer notes rumors of something returning and asks if today marks a special day for the capital.
Carl explains the rumors regarding the Emperor's lady companion's return, causing Shariel to sweat in alarm.
The traveler confirms he was away until recently while Carl listens to his stories with casual interest.
Carl discusses the confusion regarding the lady's supposed death and her sudden reappearance after a funeral.
In the background, Shariel slices food while Carl mentions the strange rumors of the lady's recuperation.
The traveler questions why anyone would claim she died, while Carl suggests she is blessed by God.
They discuss the high number of monsters in other countries compared to the Empire's systematic management.
Shariel serves a large stack of sandwiches, clanking the plate down firmly in front of the man. The customer notes her generosity, though she quips that his appetite usually demands a mountain of food. The traveler hungrily eats his meal, demonstrating his ability to consume enough food for 2 people. Carl rushes off to finish chores while the cloaked traveler continues eating his sandwich.
Shariel watches the customer with a look of quiet suspicion and confusion.
The hooded traveler questions why Shariel always orders coffee but never actually drinks any. Shariel quips she only drinks what she prepares, leading him to ask her purpose. The traveler playfully suggests one never knows what might happen, while Shariel remains unimpressed. He tosses a sandwich remnant onto his plate while mentioning his persistent personal proposal. The man invites her to reconsider his offer, promising to wait indefinitely for her answer. Shariel turns away from the counter, privately dismissing the mysterious customer as a total weirdo.
Carl flips the shop sign to indicate they are officially open for the day's business.
The morning sun shines over the quiet shop as they prepare for potential city customers.
Inside the silent shop, Shariel idly draws on the counter while Carl studies his books.
Shariel suddenly halts her hand, realizing she was unconsciously tracing a very specific magical pattern. She recognizes the rebirth pattern but resolves not to revert her current peaceful, commoner life. Carl remains intensely focused on his reading, determined to improve his literacy skills today. Hearing Carl cough repeatedly, Shariel calls out his name to check on his well-being. Carl sniffles and looks up with a tired smile, clearly struggling with a minor illness. Shariel suggests he stop working to rest, but Carl insists he is well enough to read. Shariel notes Carl's newfound academic seriousness despite his previous dismissal of learning's utility. Chibi Shariel playfully tells him to go home since the shop has no current guests. Shariel physically pushes a whimpering Carl toward the exit so he can recover at home. While sweeping the empty shop, Shariel reflects on the recurring dreams that have plagued her.
She vividly recalls dreaming of a massive, imposing stone statue standing within a dark chamber.
Her dreams also feature a glowing red geometric pattern associated with the concept because of rebirth. Later, Shariel locks the shop door and prepares to head out into the busy capital. As she walks, Shariel notices the city crowds are buzzing with fresh rumors and whispers.
She overhears citizens discussing a funeral that was recently held for a high-ranking noble lady.
The murmurs suggest that mysterious powers were used to bring the lady back to life.
Shariel pulls her hat down low, trying to distance herself from the royal gossip. She continues walking through the crowd, resolving that those palace matters no longer concern her. A pair of dirty hands reaches out toward her, desperately pleading for help and food. A beggar woman explains she hasn't eaten in days, prompting Shariel to stop and listen.
Shriel kindly slides a piece of bread from her bag into the grateful woman's waiting hands. She watches the woman eat, reflecting on her own difficult journey after fleeing the Emperor's side.
Shriel recalls hiding in the dangerous woods and surviving on meager supplies to avoid monsters.
Ragged and exhausted, she eventually staggered toward the capital's high walls under the moonlight. She remembers entering the city slums, barely able to stay upright from her extreme physical exertion.
Near collapse, she slumped against a brick wall in a dark alley to catch her breath.
As she prepared to eat her last bit of bread, a voice suddenly called out.
A younger, unkempt Carl stood before her, observing the newcomer with a curious and wary expression.
The boy looked at her intently, his gaze lingering on the bedraggled woman in the alley.
Carl offered a friendly grin, breaking the tension of their first encounter in the slums.
Shriel looked up in surprise, unsure of the strange boy's intentions toward her that night.
Carl mentioned seeing her before and offered a proper greeting, beginning their long-standing sibling-like bond. He reached out, offering to explain how things worked in the area if she had questions.
Shriel immediately lifted his hand away, coldly suggesting he should stop touching her if he's helpful.
Shriel stood up to leave, leaving a confused and slightly hurt Carl behind in the alley. Carl shouted after her, begging for a piece of her bread before she disappeared into darkness.
Shriel paused and looked back at the boy, her expression shifting as she reconsidered her path.
She proposed giving him something far better than bread if he agreed to do a favor.
Carl looked completely bewildered, questioning what could possibly be more valuable than a meal right now.
Carl asks if she truly wants him to sell her jewels on the black market for her. Carl teasingly asks what would happen if he ran away with the jewels while staying polite.
Shriel indifferently remarks that she would simply consider herself unlucky if he decided to steal them. Carl stares at Shriel with a look of wide-eyed hesitation as she leans into his space.
Shriel claims he does not look like an idiot who only chases what is before him.
A close-up shows Carl's golden eyes blinking in confusion at her sudden and cryptic assessment. Carl suggests that she could be wrong about his character after her bold and confident claim. Shriel pokes Carl's chest and tells him not to get so full of his own importance. Shriel confidently declares that she is the one who chose him for this specific partnership. Carl blushes deeply and hiccups, visibly flustered by the intensity of their close first encounter. In the present day, Shriel smiles while reflecting on how cute the boy was back then. Shriel feels sudden chills as a pair of sinister red eyes looms behind her in a vision.
Sensing an impressive presence, Shriel turns around sharply to scan the busy city street behind her. The bustling street remains filled with citizens going about their business, offering no clear sign of danger. Shriel wonders if she is being tracked by agents of the Loon family or the imperial household. A vision of Charlotte appears, noting she returned while the speaker still possessed the essential heart.
Shriel ponders why her enemies have been so quiet and wonders what they are currently scheming.
She reflects on her arrogance in assuming she couldn't be tracked after entrusting everything to Carl.
Shriel realizes she cannot risk going home if someone is truly following her through the city.
A close-up of a pair of dark boots walking steadily reinforces the threat of a stalker.
Shriel continues her brisk walk, sweating as she senses someone following her every single step. The stalker's feet continue to mimic her movements, maintaining a consistent and threatening distance behind her. Shriel's alarm grows as the sound of footsteps seems to close in on her current position.
Panic sets in as she tries to speed up while the rhythmic footsteps continue to follow relentlessly.
Shriel trips over a rock and falls to the ground with a sudden, pained cry for help.
She groans in pain, clutching her leg while the dark shadow of a man looms over. Shriel looks down in terror, bracing herself for whoever might be standing right behind her now. A dark silhouette towers over the fallen woman, creating an atmosphere of intense and impending dread.
Her heart thumps wildly as she silently begs for the mysterious figure to just walk past. Carl appears and asks if she is okay, looking deeply concerned for his fallen sister's well-being.
Shriel looks up at Carl with a mix of profound relief and lingering, terrified surprise.
Carl notes how pale she looks and holds her hands to help her stand up properly.
Shriel asks if he followed her, but he explains he simply ran over after seeing her.
She looked at her missing hat, questioning who was watching if it was not actually Carl. Shriel reflects on the tenacious gaze that has been haunting her for more than just today.
She adjusts her hat and asks Carl why he didn't go home as she previously instructed.
Carl explains he was worried about her being alone, noting she usually returns home by this time.
Carl looks down with a sad expression and offers a sincere apology for causing her any distress. Shriel regrets her anger, realizing she took her frustrations out on the innocent boy who helped her.
Over a floral background, Shriel offers a heartfelt apology and thanks him for worrying about her.
Shriel gently taps Carl's head, signaling her forgiveness and appreciation for his loyal and constant care.
Carl blushes intensely at her affectionate gesture, looking down with a shy and happy expression.
Carl asks about her leg, but Shriel tries to dismiss the injury by saying she is fine. He gives her a suspicious look, noting that her claims of being fine are usually untrue.
Carl crouches down and tells her to get on his back so he can carry her.
Shriel tries to refuse, but Carl adamantly states that her leg is hurting and insists on helping.
The scene shifts to a wide view of the city street as the sun begins to set.
Carl carries Shriel on his back, walking past other townspeople as they head toward their home.
Looking ahead, Carl calls out to his sister as they move through the busy city streets together.
Shriel reacts with surprise and privately wonders how it would feel to be truly loved by God.
The soft colors of the sunset sky signal the end of a long, emotional day. Looking toward the horizon, Shriel quietly agrees with the sentiment shared between her and Carl.
Carl carries Shriel through the streets, remarking that being helped must make her feel happy.
Shriel remains silent, her amber eyes reflecting a deep and hidden sense of inner turmoil.
The woman closes her eyes, lost in the weight of her complicated and secret past.
Their steady progress through the city streets comes to an abrupt and sudden narrative halt.
Shriel peers out from beneath her hut, sensing the growing tension in the air around them.
Noticing her anxiety, Carl asks if she is currently being chased by someone through the city. Carl privately acknowledges his low value to Shriel while promising to remain loyally by her side.
Shriel's gaze softens as she drifts into a memory of their very first meeting long ago.
Recalling their rough start, Carl asks her if she remembers when they first met each other.
In the flashback, a young Carl admits he was first caught trying to steal from her.
Carl reminds her that she eventually trusted him to sell her valuable jewels on her behalf.
The boy recalls his awe at receiving a commission, having never held so much money before.
Shriel's past self asks the boy if he would be willing to help her once again. Young Carl happily agrees to the proposal, beginning their enduring and life-changing partnership in the slums.
Their friendship allowed them to eventually escape the slums, forging a bond that survived the years. The narration notes that this period of their lives was when Carl received his eye scar.
A mysterious document appears, marking a significant and potentially dangerous turning point in their shared history.
In the past, Shriel instructs the boy to sign his name on a formal-looking document.
Carl hesitates over the paper, his expression filled with a sense of deep and visible embarrassment.
Seeing his sudden reluctance, Shriel asks him what is wrong with signing the important contract.
Blushing intensely, Carl admits that he does not actually know how to write his own name.
Shriel stares at the boy, processing his confession with a neutral and unreadable facial expression. Shriel gently takes his hand, showing him the specific strokes required to write out his name.
Narration explains that Carl still vividly remembers the warmth and significance of that specific teaching moment. He recalls the ticklish sensation on his palm and the thrill of learning to spell his name. Young Carl gazes up at his mentor with eyes full of newfound admiration and deep loyalty.
Returning to the present, Carl addresses Shriel as they continue their journey home through the streets.
Carl makes a shocking confession, admitting that he has previously taken the lives of other people. He specifies that he killed 5 people, sending a visible wave of chills through Shriel's body. The city life continues around them, oblivious to the dark and heavy secret Carl just shared. Shriel gulps in fear, her hand trembling as she grips Carl's shoulder for support and stability.
She worries that Carl might fear her for her own actions, but accepts her lack of control.
Shriel maintains a tense silence as she evaluates the weight of the boy's dark and bloody confession.
Carl reasons that if she killed based on whim, he would already be dead by her hand.
Stunned by his logic, Shriel remains speechless as she stares at the back of his head. She jokingly warns him that he is simply being saved for later once he is old enough.
As they reach a quiet area, Carl asks if he's being bred like livestock, which she confirms.
Carl laughs at the morbid joke, his expression lighting up with a brief moment of genuine amusement. Despite her outward humor, Shriel clenches her dress, privately thinking that their situation is not okay. The full moon hangs high in the night sky, casting a cold glow over the quiet city. Shriel groans in her sleep, clearly haunted by the dark and recurring nightmares of her past. She tosses and turns restlessly, her mind trapped within the fragments of a distressing and vivid dream. An oppressive atmosphere descends, blurring the lines between the sleeping world and Shriel's deep-seated psychological fears. In the dream, Shriel pleads for help, her voice filled with a sense of desperate and mounting terror. She kneels before a massive statue in a dark chamber, begging for salvation from an unnamed threat. Distant voices call out her name, trying to pull her back from the depths of her nightmare. Carl leans over her with a look of extreme worry, asking if she is all right after screaming. Shriel jolts awake in terror, her eyes wide with shock as she returns to the waking world.
Shriel wakes up panting from her nightmare as Carl stands nearby, looking deeply concerned.
Carl reaches out his hand and asks Shriel if she is feeling all right now. Shriel responds with a sharp and intense glare from her amber eyes.
Carl looks dazed and stunned as he pauses with his hand still raised midair.
Shriel continues to pant heavily, her face covered in sweat after her terrifying dream. Carl clenches his fist and reminds her that she once said she chose him. Surrounded by flowers, Carl declares that he would be happy to be used by her. Shriel firmly tells Carl not to try to find meaning in his life through her. The woman explains that she cannot provide him with anything that is truly emotional.
Recalling her plan, Shriel notes Charlotte's return and her own prepared escape route abroad.
Shriel realizes Charlotte's current spotlight is the perfect time to escape with the heart.
Carl insists he has nothing but his existence and begs her to use him. Shriel acknowledges that Carl has done much for her, even lending her his name.
Carl dismisses the value of his name, reminding her he was just an ordinary beggar.
Shuriel tells him to increase his name's value by living legally and learning more.
Carl calls it unfair, arguing that his growth and improvement are only useful for himself.
Shuriel looks at him softly and calls his potential success a reward for being honest.
With tears in his eyes, Carl confesses that he is not actually an honest person. Shuriel argues that while his environment forced him otherwise, he is naturally a forthright person. Carl looks at her with a conflicted expression and begins to say her name. Changing his mind, Carl simply wishes her a nice dream and prepares to leave.
Carl turns away and walks toward the door to give her some needed space.
Shuriel calls out to him one last time before he can exit the quiet room. Carl stops in his tracks and turns his head to see what she needs. She instructs him to have an umbrella ready because it will rain tomorrow.
Carl gazes back at her with a neutral expression, processing her unexpected bit of advice.
He offers a simple agreement and accepts her instruction before finally leaving the room.
Left alone in the silence, Shuriel feels the fragments of her nightmares returning.
In a flashback, Shuriel recalls meeting a mysterious man after her time as Charlotte.
She remembers being adopted by Duchess Lune, a major turning point in her complicated life.
A vision of her childhood shows her sleeping among many other children in an orphanage.
Shuriel reflects on the time she spent living and praying within a nameless temple.
Young Shuriel kneels before a massive, broken statue in the dark and cold temple ruins.
The girl stares forward as she reflects on the very first memories of her life.
She assumes those who abandoned her in the ruins intended for her to die there.
Local villagers took pity on the abandoned girl, helping her scrape by with some food.
A close-up of young Shuriel's eyes shows her observing the world with a guarded look.
A young boy mocks her by pulling his eye down and calling her an orphan.
The scene shifts as the same boy is shown crying and sobbing in deep distress. Fire consumes the village as the boy stands alone and weeping amidst the terrible destruction. Their defeat led to incorporation into the empire and the start of brutal religious persecution. The village disintegrated, leaving the survivors to face an uncertain and very dangerous future.
Shuriel was sent to an orphanage with the children who had previously teased her.
She ponders the nature of God while looking out from the window of the orphanage. Young Shuriel looks weary and bored while sitting through a lesson in a classroom setting. In the present, the predicted rain begins to pour down heavily onto the city streets.
A pair of hands extends a closed blue umbrella toward another person for their use.
Shuriel gives her umbrella to a blonde woman who is touched by the kind gesture. The woman promises to return the umbrella tomorrow as Shuriel watches her walk away.
A sinister man with glowing red eyes watches Shuriel from the shadows of the shop.
The hooded customer asks Shuriel if she possesses an umbrella for the coming rain.
Shuriel explains that she keeps an extra umbrella stored safely within the shop's premises.
The hooded man acknowledges her response while enjoying a slice of cake at the counter.
Shuriel expresses concern for the customer as the rainfall becomes much heavier than she anticipated.
The hooded man smiles and admits he is touched by Shuriel's unexpected display of worry.
Shuriel remains silent while the customer continues to chuckle to himself at the counter.
The hooded man inquires about the current whereabouts of the boy who usually works there.
Shuriel explains the boy is absent today because he is suffering from a bad cold.
The customer nods in agreement, noting that catching a cold during rain is quite miserable.
Shuriel looks away thoughtfully, her expression darkening as she considers the boy's recent health. She regrets not forcing Carl to stay home instead of letting him come get her.
Shuriel clenches the counter, feeling guilty for not realizing the boy was sick much sooner.
She recalls thinking the warmth she felt on her back was just a random sensation.
Shuriel decides to purchase medicine for the boy while she makes her way home later. The hooded customer observes Shuriel, finding her fluctuating moods and serious demeanor to be interesting. The hooded man suddenly appears startled as something catches his attention or surprises his senses.
He thanks Shuriel for the food and prepares to depart into the rainy city streets.
Shuriel thanks him for his patronage as the shop's doorbells jingle upon exit.
Shuriel worries about the customer's safety since she believes he left without having an umbrella.
The shop counter remains empty and silent after the mysterious hooded customer has finally departed. Heavy rain continues to pour down outside, visible through the glass window of the shop.
Shuriel stands at the threshold of the shop, watching the torrential downpour drench the city.
She observes the rain's intensity and realizes it will not be stopping anytime soon tonight.
Shuriel realizes she lied about having an umbrella and is now stuck in the rain.
Seeing others run through the downpour, Shuriel decides she must also run home without cover.
Suddenly, a person arrives and places an umbrella over Shuriel to shield her from rain.
A blonde man in a blue cloak stands behind Shuriel, holding a lace umbrella over her.
Shuriel notes that her heart has begun beating slower than usual during this tense, quiet encounter.
The blonde man stands over Shuriel in the rain, providing her with shelter under his umbrella.
Shuriel assumes the man has arrived specifically to take his heart back from her possession. The narration observes that the woman standing there no longer bears any resemblance to Charlotte.
Shuriel's heart thumps in fear as she worries the man might actually intend to kill her.
The blonde man calls out the name Shasha, addressing Shuriel with a soft and somber tone.
Shuriel flinches at the sound of the name, looking up at him with wide, startled eyes.
The blonde man repeats the name Shasha, his gaze fixed intently on the trembling woman.
He reveals that he has successfully located all of the treasures she had previously hidden away. The blonde man holds out a handful of glowing, multicolored gems for Shuriel to see. Shuriel stares in shock at the precious stones being displayed in the man's open palm.
She recognizes them as the specific gems she had sold on the black market through Carl.
The blonde man suggests that it is time for them to finally go back together.
He specifies that they should return to the place where he believes she truly belongs.
Shuriel feels a sense of being stifled as she clenches her dress in deep emotional distress.
She questions her belonging while internally asserting that she is not actually the person named Shasha.
Shuriel addresses the blonde man as Your Majesty while stating that Charlotte has returned to him.
A flashback recalls how the situation shifted the moment Charlotte returned during her previous life cycle.
The narration clarifies that the person the Emperor called Shasha was actually the real Charlotte.
Shuriel asks if he summoned her because she is the one currently holding the elixir.
She tells him to take the item, insisting it was never hers and she doesn't need it.
Shuriel argues that since he gave her the elixir, he must know how to reclaim it.
The blonde man stares at her with a melancholic expression and says the name Shasha once more.
Teary-eyed and trembling, Shuriel stares back at the man with deep, visible emotional distress.
Shuriel shouts that she is not Shasha while standing under the blonde man's umbrella.
She vehemently denies being Shasha, Charlotte, or Loon, asserting she has no connection to him. Shuriel tells him to take the elixir and asks if he came specifically for that.
Rain drenches the ornate blue cloak of the man standing silently before the distressed woman. The blonde man confirms he came to see her to fix what has been done.
Shuriel flinches and feels a chill as the blonde man reaches out to touch her. Looking sorrowful, the blonde man repeats his demand for her to return to her true place.
He asks her to trust him again, promising she will understand once his mission ends.
Shuriel pants heavily in the rain, looking physically ill from the weight of his request.
She feels sickened that he would dare ask for her trust after everything that happened. Clenching her hand, she scoffs at his request, comparing it unfavorably to Duchess Loon's behavior.
A vision of her former self falling into a dark void haunts Shuriel's current thoughts.
Shuriel realizes that this tragic ending is inevitable and cannot be changed by any person.
Shuriel looks the Emperor in the eye and prepares to deliver a very blunt statement.
Shuriel shocks him by asking if he intends for her to provide him with a child.
She resolves to stay cool-headed and find her own value beyond being Charlotte's mere substitute.
A dark realization or a new, desperate plan suddenly forms within the woman's troubled mind.
Shuriel clinches her dress and repeats her provocative question about her potential role as a mother.
Shuriel recalls the stern and cold gaze of Duchess Loon, who once dictated her life.
The blonde man looks devastated as Shuriel demands he confirm her cynical assumption about him. A sudden realization strikes Shuriel as she stares forward with a look of pure shock.
Shuriel sighs and smiles bitterly, knowing that the worst part of her journey is beginning. She instructs the blonde man to return tomorrow, claiming she needs time to prepare herself. Looking utterly defeated and sad, the blonde man simply agrees to her request to wait.
Shuriel walks away into the rain, leaving the man behind to groan in his despair.
The blonde man stands alone and dejected in the rainy street as his shoulders droop.
Shuriel continues her departure, leaving the encounter with the Emperor behind in the dark city.
She feels a suffocating pressure in her chest while walking through the heavy, relentless downpour.
Shuriel's desire to flee this place grows stronger as she pushes forward through the crowd.
Her pace quickens into a frantic dash through the rain-slicked streets of the city tonight.
Footsteps splash through the water as Shuriel runs desperately to distance herself from the past.
Shuriel gasps in surprise as she accidentally runs into another person in the heavy rain. She bumps directly into the hooded man who was previously a customer at the shop.
Shuriel apologizes for the collision, thinking she should have been more observant while running away. She looks up with a confused expression as she recognizes the person she just hit.
Shuriel asks the soaking wet man to let go of her as they stand together.
The hooded man holds a large umbrella over Shuriel, shielding her once again from rain.
He questions her about the umbrella she claimed to have, noticing she is now completely drenched.
Shuriel lies and says she lost it, her expression guarded as she looks at him.
The hooded man remains silent, holding the shelter over her as they stand in the rain.
He mumbles that she is still poor at lying, causing Shuriel to react with surprise.
A small, mysterious smile appears on the hooded man's face as he observes her reaction.
The man reaches out with a gloved hand and gently touches the side of Shuriel's face.
He continues his intimate gesture, his touch lingering on her cheek in the rainy quiet.
Shuriel gazes up at him, her eyes wide as she processes his unexpected and familiar touch.
The hooded man's glowing red eyes look down at her with an intense and knowing gaze.
He invites her to leave this place with him, a tempting offer she finds surprisingly sweet.
Shuriel admits she is unsure, looking at the mysterious man with a mix of wariness.
She reflects that while she'd normally ignore such words, she cannot treat them as jokes.
The hooded man's glowing red eyes narrow as he observes Shuriel's inner turmoil.
Shuriel staggers backward, clutching her head as a sudden, sharp pain overcomes her senses.
Desperate and confused, Shariel admits her uncertainty as she leans against the mysterious man.
Darkness envelops the scene as Shariel reflects on the honesty behind her confusing response. Intense pain thumps through Shariel's head as she struggles to remain standing on the street. The agonizing pressure in her skull intensifies, making her feel as if it might split. The hooded man questions if taking her sooner would have saved her from this ruin. He coldly suggests that his presence would have become her final resting place by now.
Overwhelmed by her headache, Shariel struggles to comprehend the meaning behind the man's cryptic words.
The hooded man gazes at her with a calm, almost serene expression despite the rain.
Shariel asks for clarification while the man's gloved hand remains resting against her pale face.
A sudden jolt of alarm or pain causes Shariel to flinch violently in his arms.
Shariel peeked through her damp hair, her gaze filled with a mixture of fear and confusion.
Various townspeople move through the rainy city streets, completely oblivious to Shariel's intense encounter. Shariel stands alone under her umbrella, watching the heavy rainfall in the desolate city.
A close-up shows Shariel's pale hands tightly gripping the dark handle of her lace umbrella. Carl groans in pain, clutching his neck as his head pounds from a severe cold.
The boy looks up in confusion as something unexpected catches his attention in the hallway. Carl discovers Shariel collapsed on the floor, leaning against a door in a weakened state. Panicked, Carl rushes to Shariel's side to check her condition and see if she's hurt.
Shariel desperately grabs Carl's hand, her expression one of urgency and deep-seated emotional distress.
She instructs Carl to lie and claim ignorance if anyone ever comes looking for her.
Carl stares at her in shock, unable to understand the meaning behind her sudden request.
Drenched and trembling, Shariel looks away as she prepares herself for a difficult conversation. Carl apologizes for his perceived failure, while Shariel worries about him being captured because of her. Shariel confesses to Carl that she has been responsible for the deaths of 5 people. She smiles bitterly while suggesting that she might soon commit yet another miserable murder. Carl declares his unwavering loyalty, promising to stay by her side regardless of her past.
Shariel stares at him in disbelief, stunned by his sudden and absolute display of devotion.
She tells him to remember her warning just in case something happens in the future. Carl looks down with a sorrowful expression, quietly addressing Shariel as his sister one last time.
A close-up shows a cup of liquid sitting on the table near the sleeping boy.
Carl sleeps soundly in his bed while Shariel watches over him with a heavy heart. Shariel places a small wooden box onto the counter with a quiet, final-sounding thud.
She examines the gems inside the box, concluding that the amount should be sufficient for him.
Narrated text notes that Carl will sleep until the afternoon due to the medicine's effects. Shariel takes a final look at the room, memorizing the scene before her planned departure. A vision of a bright, happy Carl smiling warmly appears in Shariel's guilt-ridden mind. In her memory, Carl calls out to her with a look of pure joy and affection.
Carl gasps in his sleep while Shariel prepares to leave him behind for his safety.
Shariel kneels by the bed, holding Carl's hand while wishing for him to live well. The scene shifts to the shop exterior during a clear, quiet day in the city.
Shariel resolves to begin her final day by working at the shop as she normally would. She focusedly ties her uniform headscarf, preparing to face the day with a composed mask.
Shariel stares off into the distance, deciding that she will wait for the mysterious man.
Donning her customer service smile, Shariel welcomes a patron into the shop with a professional greeting.
A gray-haired man holding a cup enters the shop as the open sign hangs nearby.
2 customers sit at the counter, enjoying their beverages in the quiet atmosphere of the shop.
Shariel sighs and rests her head on the counter, waiting expectantly for the mysterious adventurer.
The hooded man suddenly appears and silences Shariel by placing a gloved finger to her lips.
The hooded man expresses his delight that Shariel was waiting specifically for him.
He gently touches Shariel's chin, causing her to look at him with a surprised expression.
The adventurer recalls that Shariel previously asked for them to leave this place together. Standing behind the counter, Shariel agrees to follow him anywhere if he provides his assistance.
A closed sign hangs on the shop's glass door, indicating business has ended for today.
Various jars of ingredients and mugs sit neatly arranged on the wooden storage shelves. Shariel rummages through the storage area while the adventurer asks how she wants him to help. Shariel lifts a large white pillow from a basket, presenting it as part of her plan.
In a chibi scene, the adventurer looks confused while Shariel confirms the object is a pillow.
Shariel explains that they will be followed and instructs him to use the pillow as a decoy.
Resting his hand on his chin, the adventurer realizes he is being asked to act as a decoy.
Shariel looks back at him, informing him that he has the option to refuse the dangerous request.
The scene focuses on their feet as they move toward each other to finalize the arrangement.
The adventurer kneels before Shariel, stating that he finds the prospect of the plan quite fun.
He smiles warmly and notes that he cannot refuse after she specifically asked for his help.
A chibi Shariel stands up and begins to explain the finer details of her escape plans. Shariel sits at the counter and meticulously describes which alleys to use and what to avoid. Despite Shariel's worries, the adventurer gives a peace sign, having remembered every single word of instruction. Shariel places her hands firmly on the counter as she prepares for the final stage. Shariel stands beside the counter and declares that it is time for them to begin immediately. Looking toward the storage area, Shariel asks about the first step they should take.
Shuriel stares forward with a look of absolute resolve, ready to leave her current life behind.
A chibi adventurer looks baffled by her intensity, his eyes widening in a moment of confusion.
The adventurer sits at the counter, touching his cheek while waiting for Shuriel to stack.
Shuriel groans as she realizes the surrounding moisture is making it difficult to use her magic.
She attempts to conjure a magical flare, but the small flame sputters out into thin smoke.
The adventurer offers his help, and a surprised Shuriel asks how he could possibly assist her.
He suddenly grabs Shuriel's hand and bluntly demands that she provide him with some of her blood. A close-up highlights the adventurer's intense red eyes as he prepares to perform an unexpected act.
The adventurer brings Shuriel's finger to his mouth and bites down to draw a drop of blood. Shuriel winces and cries out in pain as he takes her blood without any further explanation.
Shuriel is left completely stunned and confused by the man's intimate and strange method of helping.
The adventurer pulls away and encourages her to try her magic once more following his intervention.
Shuriel gives him a highly suspicious look, still processing the shock of what just happened.
The adventurer grins mischievously at her, urging her to go on with her magical attempt.
In a chibi scene, Shuriel groans while the adventurer stands confidently with his arms folded.
Shuriel successfully conjures a massive, violent burst of fire that creates a large magical circle. The adventurer watches the display of powerful magic with a pleased and knowing smile.
Shocked by the result, Shuriel asks what magic this is, but he simply tells her to continue.
He grins and teases Shuriel by asking if he should bite her finger again to help.
A chibi Shuriel hides her hand behind her back and tells him to get on with things.
Shuriel turns away and instructs the adventurer to make his escape through the shop's back door.
The adventurer prepares to leave with the decoy pillow, bidding Shuriel farewell until their next meeting.
Shuriel stands alone in the center of the shop, taking a final look at her surroundings.
She takes a deep, steadying breath and prepares her heart for the finality of her actions.
Flames begin to swirl around Shuriel as she resolves to destroy the shop and her past.
People in the street outside begin shouting in panic as they notice fire coming from the building. The entire shop is rapidly consumed by a massive, raging inferno that lights up the city street.
Townspeople frantically rush for water while Shuriel, now hooded, slips unnoticed through the chaotic crowd.
Looking back at the burning shop one last time, Shuriel prepares to vanish into the night.
Townspeople go about their business in a bustling city street under a clear sky.
Shuriel stands amidst the crowd, looking forward with a solemn and determined expression.
A purple-haired knight in white armor confronts Shuriel, stating she has come for her.
Shuriel admits she was expecting the knight and is not surprised by her arrival. The knight reveals that His Majesty had placed his trust in Shuriel's previous actions.
A close-up shows the knight's somber gaze as she admits she also trusted Shuriel.
Shuriel and the knight stand several paces apart, their confrontation ignored by passing pedestrians.
Shuriel gives a cynical grin while questioning if the knight truly ever trusted her.
Shuriel dismissively claims that she was unaware their relationship involved any genuine mutual trust.
The knight admits they clearly held different opinions of each other before today's events. The knight commands Shuriel to accompany her, indicating that it is time to leave.
Shuriel retorts that she wouldn't have fled if she intended to be caught so easily.
The knight watches Shuriel with a cold, unwavering stare, waiting for her next move.
Shuriel glances nervously at the surrounding crowd, searching for a way to evade the knight.
The knight urges Shuriel to stop stalling and not waste any more of their time.
Shuriel quietly apologizes while her hand rests on the hilt of a concealed small knife.
Shuriel notes to herself that she purposely fled to a crowded area to facilitate her escape.
Carl suddenly appears and places a hand on Shuriel's shoulder, taking her completely by surprise.
The purple-haired knight stares in silence, processing the sudden appearance of Shuriel's young companion.
Carl expresses his relief at finding Shuriel safe after seeing the diner engulfed in flames.
Carl scolds Shuriel for trying to leave gems instead of saying a proper goodbye to him.
Shuriel stares up at Carl with a shocked and tearful expression, overwhelmed by his sudden arrival.
Carl looks away with a serious expression, reminding Shuriel that she is not alone.
Carl smiles warmly at Shuriel, asking her to remember him regardless of what happens next.
Shuriel offers a tearful apology, but Carl tells her to forget about it for now.
Carl turns to face the knight, asking if she's the one currently giving Shuriel trouble. Carl brandishes his knife and tells Shuriel to flee while he buys her some time.
The knight orders Carl to move, stating she is acting on the king's official orders.
Carl defiantly raises his middle finger to the knight, wearing a bold and mocking grin.
The knight prepares to punish Carl while he reflects on his own ability to survive danger.
Carl insists that Shuriel leave immediately while he prepares to engage the purple-haired knight.
Shuriel offers a final, grateful look toward Carl before turning to make her desperate escape.
Shuriel sprints away through the crowded street, leaving Carl behind to face the knight. Shuriel dashes past townspeople as the knight calls out for her to wait and stop.
Carl steps into the knight's path and challenges her to deal with him instead of Shuriel.
Shuriel narrates that she ran through the city streets with the speed of the wind.
Shuriel accidentally bumps into a man and offers a quick apology without stopping her flight.
Shuriel describes how her heart raced so intensely that her whole body vibrated with tension.
Shuriel continues running until she is nearly out of breath, desperate to reach the city's exit.
Shriel reaches the massive wooden castle gates and feels a surge of hope for her escape.
Shriel thinks that her freedom is finally within reach if she can just pass through these gates.
Shriel glances around frantically, realizing she needs a way to pass through the gate undetected. Nearby, a wagon driver finishes loading wooden crates into the back of a large covered carriage.
Shriel approaches the older wagon driver, calling out to him to get his immediate attention.
The man looks up in surprise as Shriel asks where his carriage is headed next. The driver mentions he's going to Rufkin, prompting Shriel to start her desperate acting routine.
Shriel begs for a ride, claiming she doesn't mind sitting among the cargo for the journey.
Shriel grips the driver's arm tightly, emphasizing her distress as she continues her plea.
Shriel fakes a story about a sick mother, using tears to convince the driver to help.
The wagon driver agrees to take her along, moved by Shriel's seemingly urgent and tragic situation. Shriel bows politely and offers her sincere thanks to the kind wagon driver.
Shriel looked forward with a quiet resolve, the town buildings fading behind her. Internal narration reflects that splitting her money and using sympathy were both wise choices. The carriage approaches the city's massive gate, where several armored guards are stationed. Shriel waits inside the wagon as an armored sentry watches their approach from ahead. The armored guard raises his hand and commands the wagon to pass through the gates. The wagon driver and Shriel sit together as they finally pass by the guard. A close-up shows Shriel's hands clenching her blue cloak as her anxiety peaks. Shriel exhales a breath of relief while the guard calls out the order to pass. Shriel looks back with shock as an armored guard suddenly commands them to stop. An armored knight walks toward the wagon with a slow, heavy, and purposeful stride. Shriel's heart beats rhythmically with tension as she awaits the guard's next move. The wagon driver looks back and asks the knight if there is a problem. The knight grins and explains that a recent accident nearby has caused quite a headache. The driver bids the guard a good day as the wagon is cleared to leave. The wagon rattles and thumps along the dirt road as it moves into the countryside.
Shriel admits she was startled while her hood continues to hide her nervous expression.
Rain begins to fall as the wagon travels along a forest path under cloudy skies. The driver notes the rain and predicts that it will likely end by tomorrow. Shriel acknowledges his comment with a quiet acknowledgement as the rain continues to fall. Shriel looks down thoughtfully, her mind clearly occupied by the companions she left behind. Shriel doubts Carl's victory and worries the adventurer has already been captured by now.
A close-up of Shriel's eye captures her internal distress and worry for her companion's safety.
Rain falls through the trees against a background of a soft, orange-tinted evening sky. A heavy thump indicates the wagon has struck something in the middle of the road. The driver sighs as he stops the wagon to investigate the source of the trouble. The driver explains the front wheel is stuck and he must go for help nearby. Shriel quickly offers to be the one who goes to find assistance for them.
The driver declines and asks Shriel to look after the wagon in the meantime.
The driver holds out a round loaf of bread for Shriel to eat while weighing.
Shriel declines, but the man notes she reminds him of his own beloved granddaughter.
The driver holds the bread out again, firmly telling Shriel to take it from him. Shriel accepts the bread and offers a soft thank you to the kind older man. The wagon driver smiles warmly and tells her that he will be back very soon. Shriel watches as the man walks away down the rainy road, leaving her alone. A close-up shows Shriel's hands as she prepares to eat the gift of bread. Shriel takes a bite of the bread while waiting patiently in the rainy forest. Looking out from the wagon, Shriel notes that the driver is taking longer than expected. Shriel decides she will go check exactly how deep the carriage wheel is actually stuck.
Shriel steps off the wagon, thinking she might find a way to help them leave.
Shriel hopes they can leave right away once the driver returns if she helps now. Shriel's expression turns to one of pure shock as she makes a sudden and startling discovery.
Shriel looks at the wheel and realizes it is perfectly fine and not stuck at all.
Shriel realizes that no one was tracing her because they simply didn't have to. Realizing she's in danger, Shriel declares that she needs to get out of there. Shriel looks around with a frantic expression as she prepares to make a quick escape. A blonde man suddenly appears and hugs Shriel tightly from behind, startling her completely. The man mentions that Shriel had told him to wait for just one day. A close-up focuses on the blonde man as he asks Shriel if his claim is true. The man continues his questioning, asking Shriel if she truly made that promise to him. A glowing celestial sphere declares that it is finally time for Shasha to fulfill her promise. Shriel forcefully shoves the blonde man away to prevent him from maintaining his unwelcome, tight embrace. The blonde man calls her Shasha as Shriel raises a blade with a cold and determined gaze. Shriel clarifies that she only requested more time and never actually promised to return to his side. Shriel questions if he truly fails to understand why she desperately fled from the capital's oppressive reach. Shriel points her knife forward while vowing that she will never be with him ever again. The blonde man looks on with a sorrowful expression as he utters her nickname one last time. Shriel decides that now is the perfect moment to buy herself some time to escape the area. The blonde man watches in shock as Shriel prepares to take a sudden and violent offensive action.
Shariel's hand trembles and shakes uncontrollably as she struggles to hold her weapon against her former companion. A look of deep internal conflict and hesitation passes over Shariel's face as she faces the man.
Blood drips from Shariel's hand as she finally drives the sharp blade directly into the man's chest.
Shariel stands frozen in shock after stabbing the blonde man, who remains surprisingly calm despite the injury.
The man asks how many times he must be slashed for her to finally stop being angry.
The blonde man states that however many times it may be, he is perfectly fine with it. The man declares that his eyes, fingers, and even his heart are already hers to do as wished.
Shariel clenches the blood-stained hilt as the weight of the man's unsettling words begins to sink in. Shariel groans in frustration while she hesitates to continue her assault against the strangely passive, bleeding man.
The blonde man encourages her to go ahead while blood drips steadily from his hand and chest.
Shariel's strength begins to fail as a final note of uncertainty reflects the end of her struggle.
Shariel tries to speak but only manages a faint sound while looking at him with dazed uncertainty. A wave of intense dizziness hits Shariel, causing her vision to blur and her surroundings to spin.
Shariel's body begins to wobble as she realizes her consciousness is rapidly fading away in the darkness.
Shariel's eyes half close as she completely loses her remaining physical strength and begins to drift away.
The blonde man watches with a melancholic and resigned expression as Shariel finally succumbs to her exhaustion.
Shariel collapses onto the cold ground with a heavy thud, her body going completely limp and still.
A pair of dark boots step toward Shariel's unconscious form lying helpless on the forest floor path.
The blonde man tenderly cradles Shariel in his arms, embracing her while she remains totally unresponsive.
The scene shifts to a grand mansion standing tall and elegant under the bright and clear sky.
A narrative notification notes the presence of a low, antique-style ceiling above the waking woman's bed.
Shariel blinks in realization, noting with a heavy heart that he has successfully brought her back home. Shariel sighs in frustration as she sits up and looks around the grand, lonely bedroom chamber.
Shariel steps across the lavish floor to investigate the mysterious location where she has been held captive.
Shariel flings the heavy curtains open, letting a flood of bright sunlight into the quiet, luxurious room. Shariel shields her eyes from the sun while expressing her annoyance with a quiet, pained sound.
Shariel notes that she does not recognize this place, but it is definitely not the city she knew. Shariel sits down in defeat, assuming that the other doors in this mansion are likely also locked.
Shariel is startled when a voice from behind suddenly acknowledges that she has finally awakened from sleep.
The view shows the backs of a silver-haired butler and a maid as they enter the room.
The butler informs Shariel that His Majesty is currently unavailable due to his many official royal duties.
Shariel sighs and remarks that the butler certainly looks different in his new formal attire.
The butler bows politely and states that he will consider her observation to be a genuine compliment. The butler invites Shariel to have some food first, noting that she must be very hungry now.
Shariel stares in silence as she processes her current situation and the butler's calm professional presence.
A close-up reveals a plate of sliced, seared meat and fresh tomatoes sitting ready on the table.
Shariel sits at the dining table with the butler standing behind her as she begins her meal.
Shariel picks up a fork and looks down at the seared meat prepared specifically for her breakfast.
Shariel thinks that His Majesty is cold-blooded and that she probably could not stab him with this.
The scene highlights the quiet and elegant interior of the mansion room where she is being held.
Shariel eats her meal surrounded by soft floral effects, though her expression remains somber and deeply troubled.
Shariel wakes up and immediately questions the butler about her current location.
The butler explains that this isolated estate is intended for her quiet recovery.
Shariel asks when His Majesty will return, but the butler cannot offer confirmation. Shariel realizes her current role is to wait obediently for the Emperor's eventual return.
A full moon hangs over the silent mansion as night falls upon the estate.
Shariel sleeps restlessly in the grand bed, illuminated by the cool glow of moonlight.
Shariel's eyes snap open as she senses a presence watching her in the dark.
The blonde Emperor sits quietly by the bed, watching Shariel as she finally awakens.
Shariel bluntly asks the Emperor if he intends to take possession of her body. The blonde man gives a simple, direct refusal to Shariel's confrontational and blunt question.
Shariel calls him a liar, insisting he only brought her back for selfish reasons.
Shariel recalls his previous demand for her to bear his child instead of Charlotte.
The Emperor claims she has completely misunderstood his true intentions regarding her return home.
Shariel questions his claim of misunderstanding, her voice filled with skepticism and deep disbelief.
Shariel pushes herself up in bed, preparing to challenge his confusing claims further. Shariel demands to know exactly what part of their relationship he thinks she misunderstood.
A narrative box reveals Shariel's belief that she is worthless beyond the dragon's heart.
The Emperor clasps his hands, stating he only wanted to keep her by his side. A close-up of the man's eyes conveys a sense of melancholy and hidden depth.
Shariel finds it weird that the man's behavior suggests he might actually love her.
Shariel lets out a frustrated breath as she continues to process his confusing behavior.
Shariel asks about the fate of the people who helped her during her escape.
The Emperor says they are currently locked up, but promises not to harm them. Shariel lets out a weary sigh, burdened by the capture of her loyal allies.
Shuriel asks about the other person, prompting the Emperor to ask for a name.
Shuriel clarifies she means the man who left the building before her own departure.
The Emperor admits that they lost him and his current whereabouts are completely unknown.
Shuriel skeptically asks if he really lost him, but he questions why he would lie.
The Emperor promises to give her whatever she wants in exchange for her presence.
Shuriel looks him in the eye and immediately demands that he let her doubt.
Shuriel argues that she has nothing to offer him besides her own physical body.
The Emperor insists that Shuriel does not need to give him anything at all.
Shuriel remains confused, unable to understand why he needs her if not for service.
Shuriel questions if his needs are ultimately driven by the dragon's heart she possesses.
Shuriel asks if he truly believes her escape was a whim he can easily dismiss.
The Emperor claims giving her the elixir proves he doesn't want her just for power.
The blonde man reflects on the high price he has paid to keep her close.
Shuriel looks at him and asks if he feels any regret for his past choices.
A flashback notes his true love returned, and he supposedly regretted giving his heart.
The blonde man looks down and firmly states that he has never regretted his decision. Shuriel stares at him in silence, her profile illuminated by the soft moonlight from above.
Surrounded by ethereal flowers, the Emperor declares his love as the reason for his actions.
Shuriel flinches at the declaration, her eyes widening with shock and visible internal conflict.
The Emperor asks Shasha for more trust and vows to return everything to normal.
A thought bubble reveals the Emperor's conviction that Shuriel's rightful place is beside him.
Shuriel recalls her past life, desperately clinging to an emperor who was completely indifferent.
Blood splatters against a dark background as Shuriel recalls being murdered by the Emperor.
A grisly vision shows the Emperor standing coldly over Shuriel's lifeless, blood-soaked body.
The Emperor's face is splattered with blood as he gazes down at his victim.
The Emperor coldly asks Shuriel's identity, erasing their shared history with a single chilling question.
A cryptic narrative fragment highlights the weight and impact of the words he spoke to her. A maid panics over Shuriel's critical condition, but the Emperor coldly orders her to be left alone despite the danger.
Shuriel reflects on the moment her memories returned, recalling how she once desperately begged for the man's affection.
A quiet, dimly lit room is disturbed as someone addresses the Emperor with formal and cautious respect. Surrounded by soft floral imagery, Shuriel dares the Emperor to kill her and seize her heart once more.
The blonde man stands in deep shadow, his expression unreadable as the weight of her words settles.
The Emperor looks down with a pained expression, noting that even she has begun to speak to him coldly.
The man shuts his eyes tightly, seemingly trying to block out the harsh reality of their broken relationship.
In a room filled with ethereal petals, the Emperor hands Shuriel a dagger and commands her to stab him.
The man accepts full blame for his past failures and offers his own arm as penance for her suffering.
Shuriel rejects his familiarity, insisting she is no longer his Shasha while showing him that her physical wounds have healed.
The Emperor argues that physical healing doesn't erase her inner pain and claims their past still binds them together today.
Shuriel stares at him with wide, uncertain eyes as she processes his mysterious mention of their shared pastimes.
A sudden realization hits Shuriel as she looks at the man, questioning if he is also hiding a secret.
An ornate golden pocket watch represents the revelation that another person has also been reborn into this current life.
Shuriel lunges forward in a desperate search for the truth, demanding that he deny being a reincarnated soul.
Shuriel looks at him with a mixture of betrayal and longing, recalling her belief that they would stay together.
The Emperor apologizes for his past lack of trust while Shuriel leans against him in a moment of vulnerability.
Shuriel remains in a daze, her profile bathed in blue light as she struggles with these overwhelming new revelations. Shuriel begins to laugh hollowly, the bitter sound reflecting the absurdity and cruelty of their intertwined, repetitive fates.
Shuriel demands to know exactly when he regained his memories, her face contorted with anger and deep suspicion.
An interruption from outside the door informs the Emperor that a message has arrived for him from the palace.
The messenger clarifies that Lady Charlotte is currently looking for him, drawing the Emperor's attention away from Shuriel.
Shuriel turns her back on him, coldly telling the Emperor that he must leave to attend to his duties.
The blonde man looks back one last time, his eyes filled with lingering sadness as he prepares to depart.
Shriel smiles with biting sarcasm, telling him to go because his beloved Shasha is waiting for his return.
The Emperor looks down with a despondent and weary expression, hurt by Shuriel's cold and resentful dismissal.
The man leaves Shuriel alone for her safety, stooping down to retrieve the discarded dagger from the carpeted floor.
The Emperor explains he must handle urgent matters and asks Shuriel to endure her isolation for a little longer.
Shuriel looks up at him with a defiant and skeptical gaze, questioning why she should wait for him. Tears well in Shuriel's eyes as she silently wonders how much longer she must endure this cycle of waiting.
The Emperor reaches out to comfort her, but Shuriel brushes him off, repeating that his other woman is waiting.
The man hesitates at the door, reaching back toward her as he begins to say her name with regret.
The blonde man clenches his fist in frustration, his internal conflict visible as he is forced to leave her.
The Emperor declares his resolve to end the current mission for Shuriel's sake, having finally reached his limit.
The man promises to reveal the full truth once his current task is finished before finally exiting the quiet room. The door clicks shut as Shuriel whispers a denial, rejecting his claims as she is left alone in silence. Narrative boxes confirm that Shuriel remembers her past life and has deduced that the Emperor remembers everything as well. Shuriel covers her face in despair, weeping as she realizes their tragic shared history is once again repeating itself.
Shuriel sits alone on the floor of the darkened bedroom, huddled in the shadows behind the heavy window curtains.
Morning light begins to filter in as birds chirp, finding Shuriel still sitting in the same spot on the floor. A maid knocks on the bedroom door, politely asking for permission to enter and attend to Shuriel's morning needs. The scene focuses on a brush moving through Shuriel's long dark hair as she is prepared for the day. While tending to her, the maid remarks on the Emperor's kindness, unaware of the complex history Shuriel shares with him.
The maid explains how the Emperor recognized her brother's intelligence and rescued their family from a life in the backcountry.
Shuriel abruptly announces her intention to leave the room, surprising the maid with her sudden and direct request. A small, simplified depiction of the maid shows her complete shock and confusion at Shuriel's unexpected desire to leave. Shuriel looks at the maid with a cold and determined stare, repeating her firm intention to go outside. The maid becomes visibly nervous, explaining that she was specifically ordered not to allow Shuriel to leave the premises.
The maid cheerfully offers a compromise, allowing Shuriel to roam the manor freely as long as she stays inside.
The maid mentions her father made breakfast and asks Shuriel if it was good. The maid explains her father forbids her from the kitchen because she is clumsy.
The moon shines brightly over the estate, marking the transition to a quiet nighttime. Shuriel notes the exact number of guards stationed outside her room and in the manor. Shuriel watches the hallway, her expression intense as she prepares to execute her escape.
Footsteps and the sound of keys signal someone approaching Shuriel's room in the dark corridor.
The maid rushes in concerned for her. Shuriel asks her to open the large windows.
The maid complies and throws the windows wide open to let in the cool air.
The maid turns back with a worried glance, unsuspecting of Shuriel's true intentions.
Shuriel suddenly lunges at the maid and restrains her with a knife to her throat.
A dull impact echoes through the room as Shuriel strikes the maid to incapacitate her. Shuriel watches the unconscious maid, having neutralized the only witness inside the room.
Shuriel apologizes for her actions, telling the sleeping maid to wait for her father.
Shuriel steps onto the window ledge, looking out at the grounds beneath the moonlit sky.
Shuriel hesitates, realizing the drop is too far to survive without some form of assistance.
Shuriel pulls and tightens a makeshift rope fashioned from bedsheets to ensure it holds.
The long sheet rope dangles from the open window, providing a path down the manor. Shuriel climbs down the side of the building, her body swinging slightly in moment. Shuriel moves slowly and carefully, determined to reach the ground without alerting the nearby mercenaries.
The makeshift rope suddenly tears, sending Shuriel plummeting the remaining distance to the grass.
Shuriel groans in pain, clutching her leg after a very rough landing on the lawn. A close-up shows her feet hitting the dirt as she tries to find her balance.
Guards immediately sound the alarm, shouting to one another that Shuriel has managed to escape.
Shuriel forces herself to stand, ignoring the throbbing pain to avoid being captured.
Two mercenaries spot her in the darkness and signal for others to converge on her.
Shuriel dashes across the grounds, desperately seeking cover before the guards can close in. A guard successfully intercepts Shuriel, grabbing her arm and ending her brief flight.
The mercenary orders Shuriel back to her room, his breathing heavy from the sudden chase.
The guards discuss knocking her out to prevent any further trouble or escape attempts.
Shuriel laments her failure, knowing the guards will never fall for the same approach again.
A metaphorical image of a caged bird highlights Shuriel's despair over her continued captivity.
Shuriel resists with all her strength, lashing out at the guard to break his hold.
The mercenary collapses in pain after Shuriel delivers a sharp, unexpected strike to him.
The guard snarls in anger and roughly grabs Shuriel's hair to force her into submission.
The man tells her to stop making things harder, his patience exhausted by her behavior.
Shuriel winces in pain and despair, her eyes welling with tears as she is overpowered.
The mercenaries drag Shuriel through the garden, her attempt at freedom definitively thwarted. Shuriel's eyes widen in shock as a mysterious figure suddenly appears in her path.
A man draped in a heavy gray cloak stands silently before Shuriel and the guards. Shuriel asks the hooded man exactly what he is doing here at this moment.
The hooded man replies that he only came because she was the one who called.
The guard is baffled, asking why she is talking to herself while in their custody.
Shuriel stares at the man, remembering their promise to set off together in the past.
The cloaked figure extends a hand and asks if she truly wants his help now.
Shuriel looks at the man with absolute desperation and finally asks for his help.
A sinister grin spreads across the man's face, satisfied by her plea for his assistance.
The silver-haired man smiles broadly, stating he has been waiting for her to say that.
The guard dismisses Shuriel's behavior as a trick, unaware of the presence standing before them.
Ethereal light surrounds Shuriel as she begins to dissolve into particles and vanish.
The mercenary gasps in horror as Shuriel completely disappears from his grasp.
The mercenary begins to dissolve as the silver-haired man asks Shuriel what she has done.
The guard's clothing collapses in a heap as his body completely vanishes into the night air. Shariel stands frozen in shock, a bead of sweat tracing down her pale, anxious face.
Looking up at her savior, Shariel tremblingly asks the silver-haired man who he really is.
The silver-haired man pulls Shariel into a deep, sudden embrace, holding her close to him.
He looks down at her and declares that it is finally time to fulfill his promise.
Shariel looks up at him with confusion, questioning exactly what promise he is referring to. A dizzying sensation washes over Shariel, her vision blurring as she stares into his golden eyes.
A faint memory shows the man kneeling, promising that they would eventually be able to meet.
The man calls Shariel his one and only priest, his red eyes glowing with intense emotion.
In a mystical realm, the man spreads a massive black wing while holding Shariel's hand.
He wraps his large wings around Shariel, pulling her into a dark and intimate space.
Black feathers fall through the light as the magical vision transitions back to the cold reality.
The man carries Shariel through the forest, announcing that they have finally reached their destination.
Shariel remains in a state of shock, her mouth slightly agape as she looks around.
They stand before the moonlit ruins of an ancient archway, a place Shariel seemingly recognizes.
The man welcomes Shariel home, his wings spread wide as he stands within the stone ruins.
A faint, knowing smile crosses the man's face as he watches Shariel process their location.
He directs Shariel to sit on the statue's base, warning her that the ground is dreary. Shariel lets out a confused sound as she stares blankly at the silver-haired man's calm face.
Shariel questions why he looks the way he does, her eyes narrowed with suspicion and doubt.
Shariel asks for his identity again, her face contorted with a mixture of fear and demand.
The man mentions that some individuals have regarded him as a god throughout history.
He adds that others have instead chosen to view him as a devilish or demonic entity.
The man notes that people call her a priest, yet he does not actually know her.
He tells her to get to know him slowly, though he already possesses knowledge of her.
The silver-haired man gazes at her with a mysterious smile, his eyes fixed on her.
Narrative text suggests that Shariel is beginning to accept the strange reality of the man's words.
Narrative boxes state that her decision remains unchanged regardless of his true nature or identity. Shariel asks if he wants something from her in exchange for his help in this life.
The man reacts dramatically, confirming his intentions with a shocked expression and a short answer.
In a chibi-style panel, the man weeps comically and asks what she takes him for. The man turns his foot sharply on the stone floor, preparing to continue their mysterious conversation. The man begins to speak again, his presence looming large as he addresses the sitting woman.
He admits that he has been waiting for this specific moment for a very long time.
Shariel silently wonders why he speaks as if they have shared a long and intimate history.
A sudden realization strikes Shariel, causing her to gasp as she connects the dots.
Shariel turns her gaze downward, her face shadowed by deep thought and the ruin's darkness.
Shariel turns back to him with a sharp look, her eyes wide as she reaches a conclusion.
The man poses amidst the magical glow, asking Shariel if she finally understands who he is.
Shariel looks up at him and states that she never truly believed in his existence.
Her foot rubs against the stone surface as she focuses on the magical symbol beneath her.
Shariel sits alone on the statue's base, her dark silhouette framed by the glowing nightlight.
The magic circle on the floor is clearly revealed, its intricate lines glowing with a faint power.
The man reveals that he was the one who personally engraved the symbol into the stone.
He points out that Shariel has already used this symbol to summon him 6 different times.
The man notes that her claim of disbelief is illogical given her repeated attempts to summon him.
The silver-haired man asks Shariel what her real reason for summoning him was this time.
Shariel looks at him with his solemn gaze, admitting that she simply wanted to correct a mistake.
The man questions what mistake she could have made, his expression turning curious and expectant.
Shariel admits in her thoughts that she simply did not know how to answer him. Shariel asks if he wants something in return. He replies that she already paid the price.
Realizing the price was her body, Shariel notes her hands would be useless without the elixir.
The silver-haired man smiles playfully, suggesting there could be even more to the cost.
Shariel stares at the man in awkward silence while processing his cryptic hint about something more.
Slumping against the statue, the silver-haired man claims that he is actually weaker than she thinks. Shariel looks at the man with utter disbelief, questioning his claim of being a weak god.
The man rests his head on his hand comfortably, looking relaxed while Shariel observes him closely.
Leaning in close with a smirk, the man tells Shariel that she has absolutely no idea.
Narrative text explains how he boiled in anger every time she called while near death's door.
Shariel sits quietly surrounded by white flowers, reflecting on the weight of the man's intense revelation.
Shariel lets out a startled sound as the man's gloved hand suddenly reaches out toward her.
The man's hand grips Shariel's neck, forcing her to look up into his cold, glowing eyes.
He asks if they should die together while his hand squeezes her throat, making her gulp.
Looking away, Shariel recalls that she once shared that same dark thought about their fate together.
The man laughs and lets her go, cheerfully revealing that the threat was just a joke.
Shriel remains silent and stunned, touching her neck where his hand had been moments ago.
He smiles softly and asks Shriel why she thinks he visited her diner every single day.
Shriel flinches as the man leans in close, maintaining his playful and mysterious gaze on her.
Above a cosmic background, he explains he only wanted to watch her, eat her food, and breathe.
Shriel points out he is an almighty god who should already possess that level of power.
The man explains that a god who has lost his faith cannot really be called a god.
Narration over a city landscape states that the god they once trusted eventually turned toward evil.
Sitting in the dark, the man is described as gradually losing the very essence of his name.
He clarifies that because all faith is lost, he can only exist now because of her. Their hands rest near each other on the stone ledge, symbolizing the deep bond they now share. He kisses Shriel's hand, declaring that she is the only meaning left to his entire existence.
Shriel stares at him in profound confusion, asking what kind of being he really is. Shriel is amazed to see that the wound on her hand has completely vanished without a trace.
The man sways happily with a proud expression while Shriel watches his sudden change in mid.
Shriel thanks him for the help but feels embarrassed by the sudden intimacy of the moment.
She offers to give him whatever he wants if there is something he desires from her.
The silver-haired man pauses to ponder her offer, his gaze turning serious and contemplative.
He looks at her directly and asks what she would do if he said he wanted her.
Shriel realizes he is asking for her life, but her heart beats fast as if he means more.
The man grins and tells her that such a thing is not possible for him right now. Shriel stares blankly, her mind struggling to keep up with the man's contradictory and playful statements. Framed by purple roses, the man asks if it would be okay for him to want her later. Shriel insists that she cannot die here, expressing her firm resolve to survive her current predicament.
Remembering the Emperor might be chasing her, Shriel clenches her fists in a moment of renewed anxiety.
Shriel springs up from the stone base, shouting that now is not the time for this talk.
Shriel's leg throbs with sharp pain, causing her to groan as she struggles to maintain her balance.
The man grabs Shriel's arm to steady her, telling her to take things slowly for a moment. He forces her to sit back down, questioning where she plans to go with her injured foot.
The man claims he was joking about wanting her, suggesting she misinterpreted the meaning of his words.
He mumbles that if he wanted to own her, he would have taken her body long ago.
Shriel looks at him with utter confusion, wondering what he is trying to tell her. Shriel feels dizzy as symbolic puzzle pieces swirl around her, representing her jumbled and returning memories.
Shriel clutches her head as her memories rush back, causing her to throb with intense mental pain.
Shriel looks up with clear eyes and tells the man that she will give him power.
The silver-haired man leans forward, inviting Shriel to officially sign a mysterious deal with him.
Shriel asks about the price. He reminds her that wishes are granted once treasures are gathered.
The man grins broadly, assuring her that she will eventually find every one of those treasures. Narrowing her eyes, Shriel asks if he is merely using her to fulfill his own desires.
The silver-haired man gazes back at her with a calm, unreadable expression as she awaits his answer.
He places his gloved hand over hers, claiming he never intended to use her for himself.
Shriel remains skeptical, questioning why he is so focused on finding the treasures if not for use.
He reaches for her again, suggesting she is still too delicate to stand alone without his help.
He leans in with a sharp, knowing look and bluntly tells Shriel that she is weak.
He fiddles with her hand, warning that she might fail her desires before they are ever filled.
The man suddenly grips her hand with a forceful clasp, ignoring her obvious discomfort as he speaks. Shriel groans as a sharp throb of pain shoots through her hand from his unexpectedly tight grip. He apologizes for hurting her and gently pecks her hand to soothe the pain he just caused.
The man reveals her hand is healed, and Shriel notes the pain has vanished after his touch.
Shriel realizes he intentionally left a mark on her, her face contorted with a sense of detest.
Shriel stands up and rejects his terms, stating she cannot make such a rash and impulsive decision.
The man simply grins in response, appearing unfazed and amused by her refusal to agree immediately. He suggests finding her new clothes and shoes, noting she is still muddy from their long journey. Shriel looks absolutely puzzled, wondering how he expects to find fresh attire in these ancient ruins.
Before she can react, the silver-haired man suddenly lifts her into his arms amidst floating white flowers.
He flashes a great, cheerful smile and tells Shriel to wait behind him for a brief second. Shriel watches him with a confused and wary expression, wondering what he is planning to do next. The man turns his back and walks toward the shadows, leaving Shriel standing near the entrance.
Shriel observes him as he approaches a massive stone statue that stands prominently within the ruins.
The man swings his leg back, preparing to deliver a powerful kick toward the ancient statue's base.
He shatters the stone base with a powerful blow, sending heavy debris flying through the air.
Large chunks of rock fall away, revealing a dark, hollow space hidden deep beneath the monument.
Shariel stares in stunned silence, her eyes wide as she processes the man's display of power.
He kicks the remaining rubble aside to clear the path, revealing stairs leading further into the darkness.
The man invites Shariel to join him, asking why she is hesitant and telling her to ascend.
They peer into the dark opening, Shariel expressing surprise at the secret chamber hidden below the statue. He assures her it is part of the estate and encourages her to follow for her gifts.
With a sharp snap of his fingers, the man summons a magical spark to light the way.
They descend the long, torchlit staircase, Shariel noting the passage is much deeper than she expected.
He offers Shariel an umbrella to use as a cane, which she recognizes as a previous gift.
The silver-haired man gives a cryptic answer, confirming her suspicion about his early departure and return. Torches along the wall flare to life with a warm glow as they descend into the depths.
Shariel flinches as something in the darkness catches her attention, her eyes filled with sudden alarm.
Shariel recoils in horror, realizing that the walls are lined with rows and rows of human skulls.
She hesitates, leaning on the umbrella as she nervously asks what kind of place he brought her.
The man looks back and calmly explains that they have entered a catacomb hidden under the earth.
He clarifies that this is an underground cemetery for the people who once believed in him.
He turns back to Shariel with a soft, inviting smile and asks if they should continue.
They walk deeper into the tunnels, their footsteps echoing against walls lined with countless ancient remains.
The corridor opens into a larger chamber where walls are entirely covered in organized rows of skulls.
The man announces that they have finally arrived at their specific destination within the vast burial site.
Shariel looks at a wall decorated with various ancient weapons, including axes, bows, and sharp daggers. The man kneels beside a large stone chest and beckons Shariel to come closer to him. He pulls a fine, frilled garment with a large red jewel from the chest and offers it.